Okay, today, 31st of October 2025, I'm going to continue with the series of Cardinal Virtues. Prudence today, the art of seeing clearly. I still have justice to do, but not very many people are following, but never mind, I'll start it, so I'll finish. Okay, so what is prudence? It's perhaps the most misunderstood of all virtues. Prudence is not the virtue that simply thinks. It's the virtue that decides, and decides rightly. It guides. It decides how and when. It has been called in earlier times, as an example, the charioteer of all the other virtues, in the sense of being the driver, in the sense of being the one who chooses which way, the driver of our actions, to achieve those goals, to fulfill them. The driver who decides by paying attention to the road, to the environment where he's at, whether he has to go fast or slow, or turns left or turns right. That is why it's called the charioteer. Evaluates which road to take. Yeah. So a prudent person is one who evaluates not just the acts themselves, but decides when to act and when not, when to speak and when to keep silent, when to wait and when to accelerate our pace. But prudence, like all other virtues, has been turned into something else in common parlance, giving another meaning. In the case of prudence, well, it is seen as sometimes something kind of slimy or duplicitous. That is a misrepresentation of what it is. So what is it? How can we identify it or define it? I'll start first with what it is not, because I think it's easier and it's a way to clear up misunderstandings, put them out of the way. What prudence is not, for example, is duplicity or disguise or pretension or dissimulation of any kind. By this misinterpretation, meaning a person who ever so subtly, indirectly, in a sort of manipulative way, wants to make things go his own way. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, it is seen as something different, but equally wrong. A person who is shy and timid and weak and fearful. And this interpretation ends up putting prudence in opposition to courage, and it is not the right one. In other words, the prudent man, it sees, if you give it this interpretation, it puts the prudent man as the opposite of the courageous man, cowardly. And still at other times, sometimes still not necessarily wrong, but looking at it in a kind of a sort of a paternalistic, contemptuous sort of way. You know, that your grandma's old advice, take a woolen sweater with you, you might get cold, fill up the tank in the car. That's good, because that's based on life's experience, giving advice, think ahead, and that's good. But prudence is that, but it's much, much more than that. Let us see. At other times, still continuing with what is not, at other times, prudence is, when people hear the word prudence, they think of hesitation and procrastination, indecision, as if the prudent person was afraid to act. But procrastination is not prudence. Procrastination is fear disguised as caution. Remember, we saw that in the video on Fortitude. Prudence has nothing to do with weakness at all. So what is it? It's actually quite a beautiful virtue. It is the art, because it goes back to the classics too, but remember I'm also including what the church teaches us, yeah? So it's the art or the ability or the skill, the grace also of knowing and discerning, of seeing the ultimate goal that we want to achieve and deciding which is the best way to achieve it. In politics, it's closer to strategy rather than tactics, if you know what I mean. But it's still more than that. So let me take you gradually, step at a time, step by step, so I'll get there at the end. What is your most valuable goal, what you are trying to achieve, to fulfill? And think about it not only in both temporal and spiritual way, okay? To win that medal, to buy that house, whatever it might be, and also in the spiritual way to lead a good life, to always keep God in your presence and so on, both temporal and spiritual, okay? You will have your own examples. The best way to obtain a goal, to arrive at that destination without getting lost halfway. The art and the ability to discern between the choices in life. We are going to have many choices in life. Yeah, many different paths, let's say. Yeah, so we see along the way to the many paths we have along the way to achieve that goal. Sometimes we won't be sure which way. So sometimes we can get to a crossroads. Is it this way, that way? Prudence won't tell you what to do at that time, at that moment, when you are there at the crossroads, which way to take. Not at that point. It's not at that point you need something else. You need other things, perhaps your instinct or resignation or other things or whatever. No, prudence has to be used before you embarked on that path, before you start the journey. The possibility before you start that there might be forks on the road. Really, it is acting wisely, or as the classic would say, acting well. It's the virtue and the art of clear sight, the ability to see reality as it is and to choose the right means to reach that good end. Good prudence, that is, because there is such a thing as bad prudence, imprudence, false prudence. What's that? Well, you could exercise prudence in the right way, but towards horrific ends, bad goals, robbing a bank. Okay? If you want to rob a bank, okay, so most probably, if you are experienced at that kind of thing, you are not just going to get up and go that particular day. No, you're going to think about it. Yes, so in a sense, you're being prudent, in inverted commas, okay? But you're going to look at the situation, the right time, the right day, and all the other possibilities and obstacles that you might have. In other words, you plan ahead. The best time, the best day. A good bank robber will look at the environment around what's happening when things are done, So, as I said, he could be, in a sense, prudent in their own way, right? But I think that that is not being prudent. That is the word used wrongly. I think we mean that he is cautious. Yeah. Caution is imprudence, part of prudence, but it's not the whole of it. They are measured in how they act. Or a burglar, if I want to break into your house. I choose the right time when you're not there. So, if I want to use the word prudent badly, I could say that I could be as prudent as a snake, waiting until the right time before it's time to attack. In other words, deceiving, piano, yeah? Okay, so no, that's not being prudent. So it's not just having a goal and trying to achieve that goal by whatever means and being patient and waiting my turn, the right time. That is not it. If my goal is to break into your house, fine, I'll wait. But that's not prudence. So what is it again? The ability to use reason to discern our true good in every circumstance, and then choose the appropriate means to achieve that good goal. It tells us how. So justice, for example, tells us what is right. I haven't done it yet, but that is obvious. Justice tells us what is right. Fortitude gives us the strength to pursue that goal, that good goal that we have. Temperance gives us balance on the way so that we don't get to excesses on the right or on the left. Yeah. Prudence is the virtue that tells us how. It is, as I said, the charioteer of all the other virtues. Without prudence, even good intentions can go astray. Even courage could easily become recklessness. Forgiveness could easily become indulgence and sentimentality and do-goodism. As the classics said, prudence is the art of right judgment. And the Catholic Church adds the duty to apply the truth, that is, the one truth, the eternal truth, to concrete situations. The imprudent man is, for example, someone who seeks the good where there is none. And so he ends up always out of step a little bit, not quite balanced, not quite in harmony. He's a little blind, a little too noisy when perhaps he would be better to have remained quiet. Speaks a little bit out of turn when he should have remained silent. You see it everywhere. Look around. Look at, for example, the most obvious, our politicians. So many of them unable to fully realize sometimes the consequences of what they are doing or what they are saying at one particular time. And therefore the chaos, the confusion they create was a little bit off, out of place, but also the opposite, of course, is also imprudent. For example, remaining silent when you should speak up, we should speak up. Someone shouting or laughing inappropriately, out of place, they're out of tune. Okay, so the prudent person does not act by impulse. or based on the mood or how you're feeling at that particular moment. He looks, he discerns, he considers, and then he acts with clarity, with a clear head. Not too soon, not too late, not blindly, not sluggishly. In the Gospels, who are the example? The five virgins are, with their oil and so on. That's an example of prudence. In literature, we have so many examples, but I thought going the best ones, well, not the best ones, but anyway, the easiest ones to understand are the fables, Aesop fables, right? And, so, for example, the little ant, the little ant is prudent. Well, here used, not prudent is not the right word either here, because it's a little animal and is acting by instinct, but we know what it means. Okay, so the little ant is prudent because he knows the need in the future, the goal, and the end, the goal, which is survival. Yeah, so in this little fable, for example, prudence is what we are taught is preparation beforehand. Preparation. Okay, is the ant of the grasshopper. I'm going to show you a few fables. I hope you stay with me. Here we are. Well, in most of the fables. They deal directly with many of them with the theme of prudence, often contrasting careful forethought with impulsive action or reckless behavior. So the ant and the grasshopper, you remember it, is the little plot is that throughout the summer, a hard-working ant tirelessly stores food for the winter, and a carefree grasshopper spends its time singing and dancing. When winter arrives, the grasshopper is cold and starving, while the little ant is warm and cozy and fuzzy and has plenty of food. In other words, planning and working hard for the future will pay off in the long run. The ant's foresight is a clear example of prudence, while the grasshopper's lack of planning leads to suffering. So here is a forethought and preparation. How about the sick lion? The sick lion. Here prudence warns us against falling for cunning or deception. It's out there in life, as we know. So an old lion, no longer strong enough to hunt, and he doesn't particularly want to anyway, pretends to be sick. And so he goes to the cave, he goes to his den there and starts to lure all the other animals to the den. Oh, I'm so old and no one cares for me. I used to hunt, but now I can no longer do it, and so on. And many beasts, out of pity and consideration, their good instincts, go and visit the den. They go inside the den to help. And what happened? He ate them all. That's what happened. So, watch here, deception through manipulation of your best instincts, with this what is happening in politics all the time. Yeah? Manipulating your best instincts get you to do misuse them, gets you to do something where they're going to be able to defeat you. Yes, in this case he ate all the other animals. So where is Prudence here? The fox, in this case, he's the good guy. The fox in this case is prudent. Why? Because he also wants to go there to help like all the others, but then he steps back and looks at the situation. And what does he see? He sees, wow, okay. So he sees that all the footprints go towards the den, but he doesn't see any footprints coming out of the den. And so he thinks, I get it. In this case, he was prudent. The fox observes that, okay, so I have one or two more. I don't know whether you want to hear them, but I want to tell you. The fox and the goat. And this is think before you jump. Okay? So, here the fox is the bad guy. A fox falls into a deep well of water. And a very, very thirsty goat passes by and sees the well and looks over and sees the fox inside the well. And the goat asks, "Is the water good?" And the fox deceitfully says, "Oh, wonderful," and starts praising the water. And so the goat foolishly jumps in. And what happens? Then the fox climbs onto the goat's back and is able to get out. And the goat is there trapped. And then at the end the fox looks over and tells the goat, "If you had as much sense as you have beard, or as your beard is long, you would have looked before you leaped." So here prudence, forethought and considering all outcomes before acting. The last one, I promise. The goose that laid the golden eggs. Here prudence against greed, or as the church calls it, avarice. Okay, so the plot is a farmer and his wife have a goose that lays one golden egg every day. But impatient and wanted more than just one, okay, they kill the goose because they think that now they will have all the golden eggs together that the goose was going to lay, thinking that all those are inside, and they find nothing, and so lose everything. They lose their daily source of wealth and of health. So too much greed is the moral of the story, will lead you to lose it all. This is imprudence driven by avarice, and so on and so forth. Oh, one more. Sorry. One more. The last one, I promise. The donkey carrying the image. This is prudence, teaching us prudence by looking at reality, what things really are, not as you would want them to be, where you are at that pleasant present moment, that place, to begin in a good way for your journey, your goal, your end, to achieve that. The present, the reality of the thing, start there. So, and your station, your position in life. In other words, your station. Okay, so a donkey is carrying a revered religious image. And as it is walking along the streets, the people kneel in the streets as he passes, as the donkey passes. And the donkey mistakenly believes that the reverence is for him and becomes terribly conceited about it. And of course, his master will have to remind him that the respect is for the image and not for him in very many ways. Okay, so the moral of the story is a lesson in prudence regarding humility, in other words, understanding one's true position, station, or whatever in life, rather than being carried away by misplaced vanity. So, in the Gospels, no more in the Gospels, again, we see the man who builds his house on a rock. Because he knows that even though things at the moment are absolutely fine, okay, no problems, the country is at peace, no problems, but nevertheless calculates that because life is not paradise, there are always problems, there are always obstacles, impediments, and so on, calculates that perhaps in the future something might happen. So he builds the house on a rock. And because if you build it on sand, at the first strong winds, it might blow away. And you don't know when the wind is going to come. So, and in a marriage, not everything is always going to be absolutely perfect like the first day. Okay, so we all know that. So preparing for the time when things might be difficult, how to approach that. All right, the word in Latin for prudence is prudentia. Prudentia, foresight, practical good judgment. But prudentia is actually a contraction in the Latin language of providentia. Now, I know we talk of providence as God, the providence, yeah, but it's contracted, and but it comes from there, from pro, in favor of, yes, and vident, viderate, to see, he who sees well. It doesn't necessarily mean always forward. It's because sometimes you have to retreat if you're prudent, but it is seeing well, seeing ahead and seeing those around you and seeing your own situation, seeing well, to be sensible. It also, of course, means anticipating, but as I said, not just the future, but being aware of what is around you and the obstacles around you. So we can say that the prudent man is one who evaluates things on the basis of his goal, his purpose, his destination, that is. And he asks himself, where will this particular act, this particular path, this particular choice take me? You're keeping your eyes on the prey, as it's so to say, your destination. If I choose, I have to go to the next town, and I choose a road to walk along to go to the next town, and I choose it only because it's a lovely walk, it's full of beautiful houses everywhere, beautiful mansions on the road, and I choose it only because it is a nice walk, because it's beautiful mansions along each side of the road. Even though it's a beautiful walk, it might be that at the end there is a roadblock or there is a huge wall and I can't get through. So you see, even though if I only chose it because it's a beautiful walk, I have to keep in mind that I want to get to the next town. If I choose it only because it is a nice walk, you could say that I led myself along the rosy garden path, as the primrose path, I think Professor Meiersheimer always says, going along the primrose path. So, in other words, I wasn't looking ahead. I hadn't anticipated. I hadn't kept my eyes on the ball, the next city. Perhaps choosing another road. My goal was to get to the other town. So, even though the road was not as pretty, and it might not have been such a good walk, nevertheless, because my goal was that, then perhaps I should have made another choice, a better choice. So, 3 stages here. Prudence. First, deliberation. Thinking carefully. Seeing the reality of where you are. Asking, what are the facts? What are the consequences? Then, after deliberation, judgment, weighing the options, choosing which path is right. Finally, command, that means deciding, decision, and doing that, taking that decision. So prudence is really practical wisdom. The imprudent person is not necessarily an ignorant person. He may know a lot of things, he may know very much, but he fails in that he does not apply what he knows. He does not translate truth into life. Prudence requires honesty, and honesty requires reality, the reality of and honesty about the reality of things and where you are, and also honesty with yourself. In other words, truth. So it is reason illuminated by conscience. It is not cleverness. It is not manipulation. It is not the art of getting one's way regardless. Prudence has nothing to do with calculation only for gain. It's about aligning our choices to what is good and true and well ordered. That's why the prudent person always listens to experience, listens to counsel, listens to conscience, and above all to grace, because grace refines judgment. Grace allows the divine light the divine light of wisdom to touch human reasoning. The prudent person knows that his understanding is limited, that he might be wrong, and precisely because of that humility, his judgment becomes clearer. So prudence is the virtue of humility in intelligence. It doesn't rush, it doesn't boast, it doesn't panic. It simply sees and then acts rightly. If fortitude gives us strength to face and endure suffering, if justice teaches us what we owe, if temperance disciplines our desires, prudence gives all of them direction. It is through prudence that all the other virtues find their measure, even love. Yes, even charity. Charity with prudence makes it possible for us to avoid our falling into sentimentality and do-goodism. It teaches us what? It teaches us also when to speak and when to be silent, when to move and when to wait, how to love rightly and how to act justly. It is not a virtue of clever minds, it is a virtue of clear souls. St. Thomas spoke of prudence brilliantly, very beautifully. Prudence is practical. Its task is to direct. If prudence is lost, then you don't want to obey your inner voice. You are unable, you don't want to adjust and weigh. You want to be perhaps spontaneous at all costs. Well, yeah, spontaneity is a good thing and it's a beautiful thing. If we use it rightly, it's a beautiful thing, for example, in children, spontaneity based on innocence. That's why it's beautiful. In adulthood, it has to be conditioned, measured by prudence, or you might end up being inappropriately spontaneous, like and reckless, like a fool or a drunk. It deals with choices and the right way to choose to get there. This is essential. So if I burst out of anger in my relationship, okay, fine, okay. Now, what is going to happen later? Silence for weeks, or perhaps even the breakdown of the relationship. So, accomplishing one mission, okay, when to keep quiet and when to affirm, when to wait and when to hurry. Even when telling the truth to this one person. Yes, of course, telling the truth is beautiful. We have to tell the truth at all times. I'm not challenging that. That's not where I'm going. But you might be telling the truth at the wrong time. That's not possible. You say, no, the truth is the truth at all times. You must always tell the truth. I know, but I'm not talking about manipulation here. I'm talking about the good that you want to do the other person when you tell him the truth. Okay, that is what you are concerned about, right? When you want to explain the truth. He's wrong about something. You see that very clearly and you want to tell him the truth. Okay? So that is your concern, right? You want to tell him the truth. But the question is when, you see, because when I say that you might have told the truth at the wrong time, this is what I mean. The wrong time only because the other person might not, just consider this, the other person might not, at this point in time when you're telling him the truth, might not be willing to hear it, or might not indeed be able to hear it. Perhaps in the way you said it. So the end result is that he walks away and ignores it altogether. And the opportunity is lost for him to learn and for you to teach him. He might even eventually turn against it, what you said. Turn his back altogether. So you haven't achieved anything. He might have given you the time to talk and explain in a different situation. There's a time and a season. And now the opportunity is lost. Why? Because when you embarked upon your teaching, he was not at that time ready to listen, ready to hear it in the way that you said it at that moment. So you lost him now, perhaps forever. And so, with the best intention in the world, you didn't help him in the end. So this is not against telling the truth. It's about telling the truth prudently, with prudence. Think also of where the other is, but say it in a way that the other is open to listening at that time, is able to listen, is ready to listen. So you might have to start at a different point, you see. I always think, for example, of the missionaries. I was thinking in preparing for this, I thought, what example can I give? And I thought of, you know, that famous priest who worked with the lepers, Saint Damien, yeah, who worked with the lepers in that island in Hawaii, right? Preaching with the example. He probably wouldn't have people listening to him if he just started saying, this is the way, you know, it would have been the truth. But what? You know, to be justified, and what is he talking about? They are not, it's not that they were not willing, they were not ready to listen to that at the high point. But he lived with them and helped them and sacrificed this and that. And so, you see, they started seeing the truth, but at a different point. That's what I mean. You know, and if sometimes because we start at the wrong end, I don't know how else to put it, you know, in politics or whatever we are arguing about, okay? If the other person is at a different point, you know, we might just end up arguing, you know, so you end up like in kindergarten, you know, you are dumb, well, you are dumber, well, you are even dumber than dumber. Well, because we didn't judge properly at what point you need to start telling the truth, okay? And consider that the other person might not necessarily be evil, okay? He might be too tired, he might be too angry about something, he might be too exasperated, he might be confused, he might be too hurt. Okay, so you are telling the truth indeed, but that other person may still not have the strength to hear it. I think we have to consider that. The other person doesn't have the strength to hear what you are saying yet, still less to accept it. Sometimes we are too late, sometimes we are too early. So if our focus is on the true goal, okay, that to do or not to do, or when to do it or how to do it, that is prudence. So relies on experience, memory, remember the silly things that we have done in our life, and also the good things and the right things, what we did right. As first. Second, consider, in order to be prudent, consider a careful reading of the present. The church calls that circumspection. Around, inspection around, not only external but internal. Okay? An enemy of prudence is haste, hurrying all the time, and prudence don't necessarily walk well together. Not because prudence is tardy or dilatory or late in get going, or even less cowardly. Because simply because when we hurry, sometimes normally we don't consider things calmly. So calm reflection, important here, not to do things on impulse. Always, before you send that text, take a few seconds, slip on it, on other decisions, we say, and it is right. A third, caution. Consider that in life there is an enemy is the wrong word. Don't want to be tragic about it. Impediments, obstacles, okay? That life is not linear, and there are ups and downs, we know that. So, consider that. Consider also opposition. We have to stop being idealists, not idealist in the sense of wishing for a great, no, idealist in the Hegelian sense of idealism, that by thinking that things are the way we wish them to be, which is the wrong way of idealism. Just because we want them to be, that doesn't mean that it is the way they are. So avoid that idealism, that false idealism, okay? Because they're not always like that. And we have to consider that simply we might not see everything, not be able to see everything that there is to see. Not understand everything that we need to understand, and so at least be cautious. You might well be right in what you're telling me, or what I want to tell you, but just consider the obstacles. And those obstacles do not necessarily need to be external all the time. How about internal obstacles? I mean excessive concern. When concern, which is good, is excessive, then we are in the excesses, and that is going to give us problems. Excessive concern for things temporal, for example, that sometimes can be very punitive. In the temporal, that the temporal sense, that they might not allow you to enjoy life, the good things in life. I'm thinking as an example, for example, what happened to the southern European countries. As I see in my culture, for example, wine. Children always learned to drink wine. There was never any problem with wine at the table. It was part of the meal always. Even within the poor, you had a glass of wine. Wine went with bread and lentils and chickpeas. Okay, so you always had your glass of wine with the meal, and little children were given always fizzy water, sparkling water, and then your dad would pour, a few drops of wine, and it would look reddish, so you could... Children grew up to see wine as a perfectly natural thing. And then the European Union came to these southern countries, and in a rather sort of puritanical way, associating wine with hard liquor, said no, they put it together, no drinking until age 18. And I'm sure they did it with good intentions, but it was very puritanical in thinking, very foreign. wine is a natural thing. It's as natural as olive oil, So because children grew up naturally seeing wine on the table, teenagers didn't rebel by going around drinking wine. It was never a problem. It is a problem now. They associated it with all these other hard liquors, and now it is a teenage problem. It wasn't before. So what I'm saying is excess in the spiritual realm, perhaps being too excessive for your own good. Okay? In the that is in the temporal thing. In the spiritual way, I always think of Martin Luther, for example, who had this excess of, he had a problem with heightened sexuality or whatever. But the thing is that he used to go to confession like 3 or 4 times a day. I mean, he was overly concerned. Again, not. I don't want to go into this issue, but excessive concern, whether it is material or whether it is spiritual, it's going to, if not guided by prudence, is going to take us where we don't want to be. Okay. Prudence, so I said, is not procrastination, harmony between reason, heart, and will. And so, to end these reflections on cardinal virtues, we still have to do justice. I'll do that in a couple of days. But temperance, fortitude, justice, and prudence. Okay, to finish. Temperance says no to excess. Fortitude says yes to difficulty. Prudence tells us how to do everything rightly, and justice gives each their due. Okay, so together they form this architecture of moral life, the 4 pillars of strength, which is fortitude, balance, which is temperance, fairness, which is justice, and clarity, which is prudence. A reflection of the divine order, the natural virtues, but a reflection of the divine order within the human soul. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.